Good evening. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you, thank you, to the William G. McGowan Theater here at the National Archives, whether you're sitting here with us in the theater or joining us on YouTube. We present tonight's panel discussion on the Constitution in partnership with the Robert H. Smith Center for the Constitution at James Madison's Montpelier, and we thank them for their support. This is the 8th year that we have partnered with the Smith Center. Before we begin, I want to tell you about a couple of other programs celebrating Constitution Week that are coming up soon. On Saturday, September 16th, bring the family to our Constitution Family Day between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. We'll have a variety of activities in the Boeing Learning Center upstairs, all relating to the United States Constitution. And on Tuesday, who are all these Navy guys, people? Welcome. Special welcome to you. Hospital Corpsmen. On Tuesday, September 19th at 7 p.m., we'll host a screening of The Words That Built America, a filmed abridged reading of the nation's 3 founding documents by more than 100 readers, including all the living presidents, vice presidents, as well as Supreme Court justices, cabinet secretaries, members of Congress, and others. The film's director-producer, Alexandra Pelosi, will introduce the film. And on Wednesday, September 27th at noon, Alexander Tsizis will talk about his new book, Constitutional Ethos, Liberal Equality for the Common Good. He will discuss the theory of constitutional law structured on the public duty to protect individual rights for the common good. To learn more about these and all of our public programs and exhibits, consult our monthly calendar of events in print or online at archives.gov. There are copies in the lobby, and you can sign up to receive it by email also. Another way to get more involved with the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports all of our education and outreach activities, and there are applications for membership also in the lobby. And a little known secret that I keep telling everyone, no one has ever been turned down for membership in the National Archives Foundation. In a few days, on September 17th, we celebrate Constitution Day. As the permanent home of those parchment pages, the National Archives has long celebrated Constitution Day and encouraged others to learn about and understand this core document. We've taken seriously President Eisenhower's intent when he signed the Citizenship Day and Constitution Week proclamation in 1958 to observe the week with appropriate ceremonies and activities to strengthen a better understanding of our rights and responsibilities as citizens of the United States so that they may manifest their gratitude for that historic week in September 1787, during which our Constitution was signed, delivered to the Continental Congress, and made known to the people. Our Constitution is short compared to other written national constitutions, but I venture to guess that relatively few among the general population have read it through. The Declaration of Independence at one page gets an annual reading on the steps of this building, but most people don't venture far beyond the Constitution's elegant preamble, beginning with the iconic phrase, "We the people." We could spend years studying the document, and many do from all parts of the political spectrum. This year, the Constitution is 230 years old, yet we have amended it only 27 times, despite 11,000 attempts over the time, showing the resilience of our founders' work. Constitution Day and Constitution Week is a good time to examine what we know and what we think we know about the supreme law of the land. And so I and all of you, I'm sure, look forward to tonight's discussion about the state of the Constitution. And I'll now turn the stage over to Douglas Smith, who serves as the Vice President of the Montpelier Foundation, which oversees the Robert H. Smith Center for the Constitution. He has worked in public policy, international development, and organizational strategy. He holds degrees from James Madison University, Lexington Theological Seminary, and is a fellow of the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership at the University of Virginia. Doug is the former chair of Heifer International and sits on the Lutheran Family Services Virginia, and James Madison University's School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences boards. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Douglas Smith.
Thank you to the Archives and the Archives Foundation for tonight. As always, it's wonderful being in this jewel of the country, the National Archives. The work that you do is so important, and you're welcome. This year, as you've done now for 8 years, is so great. Well, we've made it, 230 years, right? There have been some questionable times, admittedly, but here we are, the 230th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution. Each year, we intend to really elevate an American conversation about how it is that we're doing as a people, how it is the Constitution is doing, not only when you consider our expectations for the document, but also our expectations for one another. This is our 11th State of the Constitution lecture, sponsored by the Claude Moore Charitable Trust. Thank you, Claude Moore. Maybe you could give them a round of applause. My name is Doug Smith. I'm the Vice President at James Madison's Montpelier in Orange, Virginia. And joining me on the stage is Ramesh Ponnuru, an American columnist and a senior editor for National Review magazine. He's a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for Bloomberg View, and a contributing editor to the domestic policy journal, National Affairs. Ramesh, of course, many of us know as one of the leading conservative voices looking at culture and policy today. Next will be Maria Hinojosa. She's the founder and president of the FuturoMedia Group. She's the anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning show, Latino USA, and co-host of In the Thick. Maria is a journalist with a keen eye looking at the changing cultural and political landscape in Virginia. You may know her from her PBS show, America by the Numbers, or her frequent visits to both CBS This Morning and MSNBC. And finally, we have Khazir Khan, a Goldstar parent, author, and constitutional advocate. Mr. Khan attended Punjab University, the University Law School in Lahore, Pakistan, and Harvard Law. He specializes in commercial litigation, electronic discovery, and health privacy law. He lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, with his wife and his 2 books. He has 2 books coming out on the Constitution very soon. Join me in welcoming our panel for this evening. All right, well, welcome to the National Archives stage. We're so glad that you've joined us. What I'd love to do is for us to have a conversation this evening amongst yourselves, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A here in just a little while. And so be thinking about some of those questions you may want to bring to the panel. Here we are, 230 years into it as a constitutional people. In some ways, the Constitution created a new America. And the question tonight is it still a new American Constitution? Right? And so, Maria, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself. You grew up, you're kind of a South Side Chicago girl.
Go South Side. Yeah.
Go South Side. Tell us a little about how it is that you got into the work that you're doing. And particularly, I'd love your perspective on why it is that you think the Constitution creates this aspirational hope for all people in the United States.
So actually, the reason why I think it creates aspirational hope is because, before I get to my little life story, oftentimes in my home, I'm married to a man from the Dominican Republic who was born in the Dominican Republic and became an American citizen. I was born in Mexico, became an American citizen. And so the conversation, we're empty nesters now. Yes, it's fabulous. Love my kids, but this is great. So, I'll come in and I'll say, oh my God, can you believe that this just happened overnight? And he'll say, I know, isn't it fascinating what's happening? It's just so dynamic. And I tend to just, because I grew up in this country and I'm Mexican. So honestly, some of the things that I'm hearing right now just are so shocking that I have a very personal reaction. And he kind of looks at me and he says, you know, that's because this is your country. You're having such a hard time with this. And I'm like, yeah, it's my country. And he's kind of like, I'm new to this country. And so I believe in the laws, and I believe in the Constitution. And what we're watching is that the Constitution is alive, and it's happening, and we're watching why we chose to become American citizens. So that's kind of the dialogue that we have almost on a daily. I was born in Mexico. My father is, may he rest in peace, he's a medical doctor dedicated to researching the inner ear. He got a job offer from the University of Chicago. So we end up growing up Mexican in Hyde Park, which is actually where Barack Obama was raising his family before he moved to Washington. It's a very multicultural community. And I was thinking about, you know, what are the moments in my life as a child where my mom, who was very open to this country, as opposed to my dad, who was a little bit like, I never really wanted to leave my country. And so the first thing that came to mind was actually when my mom pulled us out of school. I was in 3rd grade, my brothers, all of us were under 8th grade and below, and wrote letters to our teacher to say, I'm going to be taking my children to witness a political demonstration around civil rights, and that's why they'll be missing school. And, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. This was something that my mother, completely understood and said, this is what we do, even if we're not citizens, because we weren't citizens at the time. And that's kind of how I go back to my understanding of the Constitution. We were not reading it every night at the dinner table, but we were living it. And I guess just to end, I think that we are, all of us, witnessing a fascinating, scary moment in history, right? Where all of us are actually going back to the Constitution. I'm so happy that now I have a green version. So we are all going back. Those of us who are immigrants or people of color, right? We're going back to it, absolutely, to have some kind of a broader context. The other thing that's happening is our non-immigrant or whatever, what's the word we want to use, Anglo, white, they are also our allies in all of this and understanding what this is going to do to protect all of us together as we move forward as a country. Because what's not happening, we know, is nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's really leaving. We know that there will actually be some who leave, but and many who will be deported. But beyond that, we're kind of here. So we've got to figure this out together, and the fact that it's been here for 230 years, and I underlined something specific that you have in your introduction, which I love. The Constitution boasts that it's the oldest written constitution of any nation. It has the shortest constitution in the world, and one that has undergone relatively few alterations. So it is, in fact, a document that is alive, and for now, for many, it's offering a real sense of protection and concern.
Well, we may get to that in a bit. Let me go to Khazir Khan here at the end. Known, without question, known for your stirring speech at the DNC convention, really launched you onto a national stage of appreciation and critique, no doubt. We're very familiar with the idea that the Constitution is a compact. It brought these disparate states together 230 years ago, and we know it as a contract. You're a lawyer. You appreciate the legal portions of that. But my question for you is the Constitution also a moral document? And if so, what is its promise?
Well, thank you. I'm so honored. My conversations don't start unless I extend my sincere thanks to our veterans in the audience and outside. And our men and women serving in uniform and in law enforcement that keep us safe, and their families for their sacrifice. Thank you. And our thoughts and prayers are with our brothers and sisters in Texas and in Florida. May God bless them, protect them, keep them safe. Thank you. My presence on this stage before this wonderful audience is a testament what is possible. Never thought ever in my life that I will have the honor and the dignity of sitting with these leaders, thought leaders, national leaders. It is only by the blessing of this document that I sit here. The rights in this blessed document may be inalienable as rights and a scholar, but they are not self-executing. They may be inalienable, but they are on piece of paper. It's us that make those rights survive generation to generation and thrive. I have lived, answering your question, I have lived under two dictators, authoritarian rulers in Pakistan. First was Ayub Khan, General Ayub Khan and his martial law. I was in middle school. I have seen with my own eyes protesting people getting shot, getting killed, getting beaten, no rights. Media, no newspaper for the next whole week, shut it off because they are criticizing General Ayub Khan. Media is bad. Turn the press off. The only reason they would allow the media to be opened and publishing newspaper would be if they would agree with General Ayub Khan and his agenda. Second time, I was in law school, second year of my law school, and General Ziaul Haq's martial law came to rule Pakistan. Us ordinary citizens had no rights, no civil liberties, cannot come out unless government allows you to do that, cannot assemble more than 4 people unless government allows you to do that. I have seen with my own eyes lawyers were the first one to protest against those atrocities, violation of basic human rights, basic rights of able to speak what you wish to say, assembly. I've seen with as I speak about it, it is so vividly in front of my eyes how I have seen people getting shot, lawyers getting shot on the streets because they were protesting against the order of the government. And then I got acquainted with these blessed documents. I took a course in comparative constitutional law. 4 constitutions were part of that course. Constitution of United States, Constitution of USSR. Some of you remember what USSR. Exactly. And Germany and Magna Carta. I brought the materials and I put them on the table in my dorm room, a small room with 1 cot, a table, a chair, and a closet. And the very first, this is my introduction to this blessed land, this blessed nation, this blessed country. The very first word of the documents that were piled up there was Declaration of Independence. I was a law student, I could comprehend who declares independence. People are given independence, as was in subcontinent. You bargain independence, you acquire, you struggle for it and all of that. But who declares Declaration of Independence? What consequences for that declaration would be? I just couldn't take my eyes off. I read the entire document, understood half of it because of the language and my inability to fully comprehend. Then I saw the articles. By the time, and I'm still standing and reading in my dorm room that afternoon, by the time I got to the Bill of Rights, I knew why those Bill of Rights have to be there. I had read the grievances, I had read what had taken place at the time of Declaration of Independence, why the independence had to be declared and the price had to be paid. Later on, I become aware of what price those 56 patriots paid by signing their names and their addresses on that document. And then I realized that as I was reading the First Amendment, the first 5 words I cannot forget always inspire me. Congress is being told, Congress shall make no law. I have compared languages of various constitutions of the world. There is no such document ever anywhere which tells the House of Parliament, where majority rules, that you cannot touch these 5 rights, these rights that are part of the First Amendment. Then comes Second Amendment. By the time I got to the 14th Amendment, I know why this nation is called one of the greatest nations on earth. Not because of its wealth, its military might, not at all. It's because of those dignities. I call them human dignities because ask any person, any human being on this planet Earth from any corner of the world, they will all say that, of course, we want these dignities in our life. We are entitled as human beings. That is why I call that document not only Bill of Rights, but it is a moral document. Every human being throughout the human existence on this planet Earth had wished, aspires to have those dignities in life, and we are so blessed to have them guaranteed to us in that document. That is why I call it, and I say it, and I believe this is a moral document.
Great. Thank you. Ramesh, you're kind of a Kansas boy, born in Kansas. Your fellow panelists have some amazing stories about how they've come to appreciate the country and the document itself. How did you make your way into becoming such a dominant force and voice within the public square? And here we are in the archives. What does it mean to you that the Constitution has words on parchment, but they really are, as you suggested, alive through us? Is that something that you have really felt in growing up?
Well, I'll let you know when I become a dominant voice. I'll answer that question then. Yes, I did grow up in Kansas City, Kansas. My parents moved over from India a month before I was born. I gather that the medical establishment has grown less tolerant of flights across the world in the 8th month of pregnancy since 1974. It was an auspicious time. Politically, I was born 1 week into the Ford administration, and soon thereafter, I believe India started martial law, at which point the ambassador to India, Daniel Patrick Moynihan at the time, told President Ford the news by saying, "Congratulations, Mr. President, you're now the leader of the world's largest democracy." Growing up, it was kind of funny. I acquired my citizenship through the 14th Amendment. I'm a birthright citizen, and this is something I had over my brothers. And I remember we all had this shared understanding that I could be president and they couldn't. Right. Because, once you were born here, that was the big hurdle. And then you had a pretty good shot at it. My brothers and my mother became citizens actually the same day that President Reagan was shot. I have a very vivid memory of it, and I've never checked it because it might be, like a lot of vivid childhood memories, false. But that's the way I remember it. And that's how I'm going to stick to that. I do think that it's funny, particularly the last few years. There have been an increasing number of occasions on which I will get a kind of racist blowback, where people will tell me on social media, usually under the cover of anonymity, go back where you came from. And
Kansas.
Yeah, when on the occasions when I respond at all, I say, well, Kansas City's a very nice place to visit, actually. I try to get back there when I can. Just one little aside, because, you know, like a doting father, I have to tell the story of my 5-year-old, then 5-year-old, a few months ago. She was in the car. My wife was driving her and a friend on a play date, and my wife, it suddenly occurred to her to tell them, you know, both of your fathers are from Kansas. And my daughter pipes up with her characteristic confidence. My father is from a part of Kansas called India. She posted it on Facebook, and my friend Ajit commented, a lot of us are from that part of Kansas. You know, I think Maria got to a very important point about the Constitution when she talked about its brevity and the lack of alteration in it. And the thing that strikes me about our Constitution, compared to the constitutions of many of the states and the constitutions of many countries, is exactly that feature, that it is not actually all that prescriptive. It creates a structure that is intended to make self-government possible and to protect our rights. And within those very broad contours, it leaves a lot open. Even the meaning of constitutional provisions themselves, as Madison said, in many cases is going to be liquidated through the play of politics, through the collision of the branches, through arguments to the public. And where does that leave us? I think the answer is it leaves us wherever we want to be. And that is, I think, the greatness of the document, that it secures what can be secured, and it gives us the freedom to innovate within that structure.
You know, it's interesting, you just going back to what you said about sometimes social media, you might get some critiques. I've been stalking you. And maybe
Just Ramesh or all of
No,
us?
all of you.
Oh, okay.
And you know, social media has actually become quite an interesting place because there's so much anonymity that people post things that they would never say in person. Although recently we find that people are saying these things in person as well, and that gets to your worry, Maria. We had some comments about this program actually coming in through social media, and they were really quite critical. And one of them consistently was, well, where's the American?
Yeah.
Right? And so we kind of
You didn't tag me on that post.
No.
Ideally, that would have been by a Macedonian Twitter account.
Yeah.
With an egg for its avatar.
So maybe I should say that, so a new UVA poll has come out, University of Virginia. It says that 39% of these, there's a national poll, 39% of respondents feel like white people are under attack. 55% of respondents feel like racial minorities are under attack. What's with all the attacks? You know, what is it that we have become as a constitutional people where there's so much tension and so much just vehement attacks to one another in public now? You know, where is all of this headed, and where is it all coming from?
Can I just give a little bit of context just as a journalist? And I'm not sure if you agree with this, but there has been a kind of national narrative that's been going on, I would say, you know, since the mid-1980s. So I suppose post-Immigration Reform and Control Act by Ronald Reagan, 1986, and it's kind of been, you've seen it, right? You've seen this kind of like, oh my God, it's the browning of America. Oh my God, you know, Time Magazine, a Mexico, not America, but a Mexico. You know, all of this coverage about something that is absolutely data-based and happening, right? Our country is demographically changing. It will be, by sometime after 2040 or so, or if not before, a majority non-white nation, whatever that means exactly. And I think that part of, you know, the media as a whole, and this is, we understand it's hard, but just for the sake of this conversation, has actually become less diverse. our newsrooms have become less diverse since 9/11. So the country is becoming more diverse in terms of the demographics, but the newsrooms have become less diverse. So you see where I'm going here. So there's a kind of narrative of like demographic change, we're becoming less white, you know, oh my God, what? Ah! Which is the way I think a lot of the newsrooms that are majority not white might be approaching this story, which is a reason I think that actually has an impact in kind of how they understand the narrative. So instead of having super diverse newsrooms so that everybody is included in that conversation, right? And so Ramesh is like, what do you mean? Like, I'm the American dude. Like, he's the only one, actually, the two of you, who are the Americans, right? Because Mr. Khan and I were both born outside of the United States. So this notion that this change means fear, that this change means somebody's losing something and somebody's gaining something. And that, I think, happened because we're human beings, but some of those people in those non-diverse newsrooms had that perspective and has essentially created a national narrative where instead of saying, wow, demographics change, how fascinating, how interesting, what a fascinating conversation for what's next, it's been mostly in the context of something shifting, that means somebody might lose. And I just think that that's part of a narrative that had we all been in charge of the newsrooms, maybe we would have decided differently.
Well, I think that's probably a big part of the picture. One thing that I think we should be mindful of, if you particularly think of the amount of divisiveness and conflict that we're now associating with what we're the last couple of years been calling the white working class, white people without college degrees is mostly what's meant there. I think you've got three things going on there, and it's, a lot of it is fear of change, but particularly fear of a particular kind of change that's happened. I think that you've got a couple things going on. One where this is a segment of the population that has not been doing particularly well over the last 20 years. Wages have been stagnating, plants closing, mortality rates even are up, and you've got that, and then you've got what sounds to them like people saying they're privileged. And I don't mean to suggest that there isn't such a thing as white privilege, but they don't feel very privileged. And then you add to that their sense that cultural norms have been changing so rapidly and that they're liable to be accused of harboring bigotry when they don't mean to be saying anything offensive to anybody. I think you have this very defensive reaction, sometimes even an angry reaction, to the sense that they are on trial, that their sufferings are not being acknowledged or taken seriously.
Just a footnote to this very learned and scholarly answer to your question. Mine is very pedestrian. I share this humbly. United States military is considered the best military in the entire world. And it is the most diverse military of the world. 30% of its membership is non-white. Military had discovered that without regard to race, color, or origin, or where you come from, where you are born, once you are put in an environment where you are given an opportunity to excel, people excel equally. That's one example, regardless of race or color. Second, and it's just a footnote, but we are all becoming aware of what was just said. Those sentiments exist, but we all should be mindful of that those who do not wish us well are exploiting those sentiments. In last election, prior to then, and they continue to. I deliberately mentioned the word Soviet Union. I, with my own eyes in Pakistan, the disintegration of Soviet Union, the defeat of Soviet Union in Afghanistan, I witnessed it with my own eyes, used to read newspapers and see how it is dismantling. You think they have forgotten that? There is that grudge against the solidarity of America, against the goodness of America, against the democracy of America, against the rights and privileges that we enjoy. So our enemy, those who do not wish us well, and I say that repeatedly, have exploited that sentiment that probably rightly had existed. We ought to be mindful of that. And I am certain I have stood before, in Cedar Rapids and Des Moines, Iowa, before the hall full of people that did not vote for the candidate that I voted, and I have answered their questions. And they have stood up and they have said, Mr. Khan, tell us we are having buyer's remorse. Tell us where to go from here. And they admitted, they said that we did not vote in that direction. We were not expecting that. And I had some suggestions how to contact their legislators, their senators, their congressmen, and tell them to speak now or you will never be supported. Some are doing that, but there is no lack of patriotism in their hearts, regardless of what the background is. But that sentiment of we are left behind or we are not enjoying the privilege that we have enjoyed up until now is being exploited, is being heightened to some extent by those who do not wish us well.
You know, this struggle with change is I think is really quite interesting. Back to my UVA poll, I love a good UVA poll. Nearly a third of the respondents in the poll said that the country needs to protect and preserve European heritage, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. And 8% support white nationalism, and 4% are actually in support of neo-Nazism. Khazir, you're from Charlottesville, and of course Charlottesville saw quite a bit of this last month. And I guess, what does this say to us? That's, we can talk about the economics, and I think you're right. I think the economics are the canary in the coal mine about people who feel like they don't have accessibility. But there is also this pushback against change and a rising group of people who are acting like terrorists. Is that fair to say? Where is all this headed?
Well, it is not headed in American direction. Let me be blunt and straightforward. And the reason I say this, I take the privilege and permission to speak on this because I have stood. I was home. I was told on Friday night that please do not come out from your home Friday and Saturday.
Who said that?
Email came from those who wanted to wish me well, and they have something to do with the city, that there is going to be lots of noise in the city. And I said, all right, we are peaceful people. We live outside the city. I will not come out. I told children and family, please do not go towards the downtown area. I had ordered a book, and the book had come in, so I got a call from the bookstore that your book is waiting, please come in. I wanted to read it, and I had Friday and Saturday free to myself, and I thought I should go get that. And I will avoid the downtown area, the Emancipation Park and the courthouse and the downtown area. I will go through Medical Center. Hopefully that will be quieter area, and I'll go and get the book. As I get close to the rotunda and close to the monument of the statue of Thomas Jefferson on the grounds of University of Virginia, that area is called Corner. Traffic is totally stopped. I wondered maybe there is an accident up front or something, so we paused. And then I hear the noise, and I begin to see the torches. And so we came out of the car and there were people on corners standing outside the cars with their families, with their children. I have never seen the fear on the faces of people in the United States like I saw that afternoon, that evening, when they saw these chants and when they saw these flags. I understand there is freedom of speech, but where is my freedom not to be feared in my own town, on my own street, in my own car? I was not part of that noise. And then something worse that I cannot imagine that I would ever see on the streets of the United States. I saw one person holding the flag, one of the marchers holding the United States flag, second person right next to him holding the Nazi flag. We have defeated that. My sons and daughters have died defeating Nazis. How dare they come to this city, my city, and display that hateful speech. We will not stand for that. There is no room for that. The reason is that somehow believing in the freedom of speech, we have started to accept hateful speech, threatening speech, speech that instills fear. The chants that I heard, everyone has seen it on television. I have seen it standing right there. When I saw people wearing the guns, multiple guns, I was concerned for my safety. I got in the car and I lowered the shadow of the front glass of the car so that I will not be recognized or I will not be seen. It cannot be happening on the streets of the United States. The chants everybody has heard, the slogans, the march that we have seen. Next day, we decided that we will not go out at all. It is not safe for us. These people have guns, they have weapons, and they are totally creating fear in the hearts of those that are peacefully sitting in their homes, minding their own businesses. Children saw that, women, men, everyone in the city saw that. And that is un-American. There is no room for that kind of hatred anymore in America. America will never stand for that. We will reject it every step of the way. They may call it whatever they want to call it. If they have freedom of speech, we have freedom to live peacefully in our houses, on our streets, in our cities. And we will not stand for their threats or their display of un-American hate.
But actually, and we all love Mr. Khan for his for the way he speaks with such passion. But the truth is, and as in my political podcast called In the Thick, this has come because I'm like you, Mr. Khan. My initial is like, this is not American, but it is. In fact, it is. We cannot. We can't act like white supremacy or white nationalism is not a part of who we are. And I'm, again, like Mr. Khan, I'm just like, how is this possible? How is this happening? And then and this whole notion that this is un-American, how is this happening now? And then I thought back and I was like, hold on a second. When I was 6 years old, or más o menos, and George Wallace was running for president, and I was a kid. I was this little Mexican kid, but who was, for all intents and purposes, a little American girl walking home from school with my best friend who was Jewish. And we knew something about politics. We knew George Wallace was running. And this conversation that we were having, walking home, was, so if George Wallace wins, which basement should we hide in? In your basement, Linda? Because your basement is a little bit bigger, but our basement actually is cozier. So I was like, I've understood that white supremacy has been a part of the national conversation since I was that age. So it is who we are. And I'm horrified by what happened. I'm horrified by the recent comments like a few hours ago from the president, who once again said today that it was everyone's fault. But at the same
But not
time,
his.
But not his.
Never his.
But I do think that if there is a silver lining to this horrible storm cloud, it is that we are at least, and it's painful. But I got to tell you, I am so happy that this is happening, that I'm here, that we're here, because the truth is, and I know that Mr. Khan spoke at the Democratic National Convention, but I am, party politics don't really, if there had been a Democrat in the office, would we be having this conversation right now? And by the way, I know that there is horror out there in real people's lives, like 5 minutes from where we're sitting tonight, that they are worried that there will be a knock on their door and that there will be a deportation that happens tomorrow. So I understand. I don't want to be flip to say, well, there's a great silver lining. But there is something that is happening, and it is that we are engaging. We're doing this, and it's not easy. It's hard. But that's what we do. And that, I think, Mr. Khan, is eminently American. The fact that we know that because of the Constitution, we can, in fact, we have that right to have the conversation and disagree without killing each other. So it's very sad what's happening, but at the same time, we are naming things and seeing things that are horribly, but truly American.
If I can
Yeah, absolutely.
weigh in here. I do think that the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, white nationalists, that they're a marginal fringe group, but I think they've become less marginal, less fringe over the last 2 years or so. And that's largely because we do have a president who is adhering to a no enemies to the right policy. And I think as a clearly deliberate strategy on his part and on the part of some of the people in his orbit. Look, the reason these people chose the Robert E. Lee statue was because Confederate slave owners are more popular than they are. And the whole march, I think, would have been a political disaster for them if not for the way the White House responded to it, which emboldened them further and gave them legitimacy and blurred the lines between who are legitimate and illegitimate players in American politics.
So we're having this conversation. Well, I should say that we think we're having a conversation about this, but there doesn't seem to be a moderator, right? So a conversation without a moderator is just an argument.
Oh, you mean a national conversation?
A national conversation.
He wasn't saying he's being a bad moderator.
No.
I know, we were all like, you're okay, Doug, you're part of the conversation here.
I appreciate the affirmation. So, I mean, I think what you're saying is we are experiencing some level of crisis of leadership.
Well, I mean, I think we've had an inflated sense of the role of the president as the moral leader of the country. And I guess one way of looking at this presidency is it's a corrective to that idea.
Fair enough. So is the Constitution a vehicle, though, that allows us to have that national conversation? Or is the Constitution going to follow the results of the conversation? I guess what I'm saying is, are we adapting to the Constitution, or are we expecting that as this plays out during, I presume, the next generation, the Constitution is going to have to adapt to us? And I'll take the second hand. Nobody wants to be the first. Khazir.
Let me, as I stated earlier, that these rights and dignities may be inalienable, written in our Constitution, but they are not self-executory. They do not execute themselves. It is us, all of us, that make them come alive generation to generation. So it is our obligation to make sure that these privileges, immunities, part of our Constitution and founding documents are preserved and live. I must cite a letter very quickly. A Second World War retired Army nurse has written us a letter. Among thousands and thousands of cards and letters that have come home, that letter sits on top of the pile, and I read it often whenever I'm getting disheartened, whenever I'm getting tired of being in public day after day after day. That letter narrates what took place prior to Second World War. Nationalism, economic well-being, fear of immigrants. Look at the script of the First World War. Look at the script of the Second World War. These dumb nationalists, they have no other script but these three issues. They exploit that because that is how people get so emotionally involved with them and begin to follow them. In that letter, she says at the end, she said, Mr. and Mrs. Khan, please do not stop speaking. Had more people spoken prior to Second World War, we would have avoided that. The atrocities that were committed against our Jewish brothers and sisters could have been avoided. The atrocities against the mankind, against the humankind that were committed could have been avoided. So they have been at it, First World War, Second World War. They have found a room and encouraging, morally compromised leaders sitting in the White House again to lead them and give them room and give them courage to stand up and walk in Charlottesville all over again. We will not let that happen anymore. I have that letter. I read it. Whenever I need encouragement, I read that letter, and I am so encouraged to continue to speak. We will not that be repeated again. I was in London. Some of the scholars pointed to me and said that, look, why America is not considering this. And this was after our election, after Brexit, but before French election. This is what I was told. The first half of the last century, and I leave this for you to think about in your free time. First half of the last century had seen 2 world wars based on fear of immigrants, nationalism, economic well-being. Then the mankind and the leaders realized that this will not do. We have to come together. The second half of the last century gave us United Nations with all its mess and weakness, but it's an institution where nations come together, gave us NATO, gave us European Union. There is one common thread among all of these 3 institutions that mankind discovered, that is where lies the progress in unity, in coming together, working together, moving forward together. Therefore, see what happened in the second half of last century. The humanity saw the most progress mankind has ever made after coming together. So the history is in front of us. We just need to look at it. They are at it all over again. 3rd time. But this time, we are all aware. We are all standing. I have traveled Portland, Oregon, to Texas, to Houston, Texas, to Dallas, Texas, to Toledo, to Columbus, to Pittsburgh, to Des Moines. I have seen exactly same sentiment, I sense it. We will not let that happen ever again in our life thereafter, because we have seen what could have happened. It has happened twice in the first half of the last century. We will not let that happen.
Let me take a stab also at the question. I do think, the sort of the flip side of the brevity of the Constitution that we're talking about is it does presuppose a lot. It does rest on some cultural preconditions for self-government. It assumes that we're a people, as Americans, who regard ourselves as a people in the sense that we think that whatever our other differences, we have common interests, and we can deliberate together in good faith about how to advance those interests. And I think to the extent we cease to have that sense of commonality, And I think it's pretty clear we have lost some of that sense, and we're much more team red and team blue these days. Self-government, constitutional self-government becomes much, much harder. And I do think that, nationalism is, for a variety of reasons, some of them good, kind of a dirty word, but there is such a thing as a kind of national solidarity, a sense of national belonging together that is really important to cultivate. And I do think that our answer to a kind of narrow-minded or racially exclusive nationalism has to be that broader, enlightened, and unifying kind of nationalism.
So,
Which, frankly, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Doug,
Good.
but because I was just writing about this, I mean, that's what happened after 9/11. Everybody wanted to be a New Yorker, remember? I mean, I don't know, some of you may have been too young, but there was that, prior to that, it was New York, drop dead, who cares? Like, you guys are weirdos. And after 9/11, it was like, we all want to be New Yorkers. So that was the nationalistic moment for me. And it was amazing to witness. By the way, I ended up suffering from PTSD because at that time I was working for CNN, and because I witnessed the tower coming down. So I actually, by the way, immediately right after, because I was experiencing exposure, I had feelings that I never thought I would. So I understand people's reactions and fears because I was there with them. But the flip side to that was suddenly that everybody in the country saw themselves in us, and New York absolutely represents the whole country, which is that we are from everywhere. And we saw who died there. It was everyone. I was reporting with the Muslim families who lost their loved ones who worked in the towers. So that is, to me, a kind of nationalism. And even Houston is a kind of nationalism. It's when there's a crisis, you're not reaching out and saying, hold on, are you team red or team blue before you're saving me? Or, hold on, are you Jewish? Are you this? There's no time to ask those questions. And then you really, truly have to see yourself in the person most unlike you, which is really like the dream of the Constitution coming to life, when you can see yourself in the person most unlike you and believe that you have as much as a right to survive and live as I do.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying about nationalism, and at times nationalism has a place. But my sense is that at the heart of the struggles that we may be experiencing right now, and it may be coming from an administration, or it may be the administration is propped up by a broader movement, it's really a pushback against globalism. We have a much more globalized country than we might have had in the past. We talk about immigration, but really, it's a much larger system that we're part of, and small levers here really impact the world. And so, as we admit that there is a changing America, my question for the three of you is the Constitution going to survive this? We started by saying, hey, the Constitution created a new America. Is it still a new American Constitution that, while it may be inspirational, is actually going to have the glue that continues to bind us? Is it going to work? Or are we looking at a massive change in the future?
I think I'm kind of like, who knows? I mean, I don't know. I'm hopeful. I mean, the thought of okay, the Constitution is going to be thrown out and I actually start getting a little panicky. I almost start having a physical reaction to it. So, yeah, I think it's going to survive. Because I actually believe that what happened in Charlottesville, as shocking as it was, is actually, as Ramesh said, they're actually really tiny. They're a very small percentage of who we are as a country. They had been gathering and planning that for the longest time, and that's why it looked big. But as you know, even within that white nationalist, white supremacist movement, there's all kinds of divisions, right? The older ones want to march with their KKK caps, and the younger ones want to march in their white shirts and khakis and have no KKK. So there's a whole conversation that's happening internally there. But yes, I believe it's going to survive because I believe that this is the majority of who we are.
Ramesh, I hate to call you out here, but there are some people who are actually saying that there needs to be a new constitutional convention.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's a symptom of frustration with our institutions and their seeming dysfunction and lack of responsiveness. I think the frustration is widely shared, even if that particular manifestation of it is confined more to people on the right end of the political spectrum. It does strike me that in a way that I'm not sure when the previous example of this would have been. We've basically got now two major political parties that each think, or that each contain large elements that think that the other party is an enemy of the Constitution, is a threat to the Constitution. I would like to have some faith in our institutions and ideals, but I don't think that we're going to be well served by just being Pollyanna-ish about it. I think that if we want to preserve the American experiment, we have to remember that it's in the nature of experiments to fail.
Yeah, and in fact, Madison, I had to throw Madison in there, right?
You got the
Khazir said
trademark.
something about Jefferson, and I kind of, it's always Jefferson. In that Madisonian idea, there is the ability for states to call for a constitutional convention. That may not have been wholly a Madisonian concept, but in the document that we most describe as his greatest legacy, there are these valves, these steam valves that we can open, and that seems to be one of them. Why not have a new constitutional convention and just fight it out and to see if maybe this will better represent who we think we are?
I don't think so. I am there is your answer.
There's the representative sample of America.
And this answer resonates throughout the country. I am testament to that. How could you have a convention or whatever you propose in the presence of this? This is what majority of United States is. What I'm saying is that our founding documents, our Constitution has survived turmoils before this as well, many a times. We will survive this momentary dark period. Let's have faith. Let's have faith in the values, in the goodness of America, goodness of American nation. Because I am witness to all of this. I keep pointing towards me because I very clearly remember when I took the oath of citizenship of this country. I suggest, and I think there was conversation about this earlier, about the test of becoming a citizen. I suggest that all Americans should take the oath of citizenship. Say those words. Say those words. It will change you. The moment you take that oath, it instills something so sacred in you that only Americans know, those who have gone through this experience. Therefore, it is my faith, by observation, by standing before the nation, by standing community to community to community, that this nation loves its values of human dignity, equal protection, equal dignity. The rest of the world continues to aspire to these values. What are you going to put in that new document or new convention? The reason is that if you look at, go country to country, nation to nation, and you will see that people aspire to have these values. And where these values come from, it's a totally different debate and different conversation, but here we are. We cherish these values. We will defend these values. And the rest of the world, other nations, our rule of law, for example. I have participated in those conversations where leaders of the other parts of the world want to learn our rule of law so that they can go back home and implement some resemblance of this in their nation so that their citizens would have some dignities that are enshrined in our rule of law. So it is my firm belief by observing this nation's sentiments towards their constitution, that there is no room. Of course, it's a living document, our Supreme Court. Our Congress has the authority to create, redefine things that need to be discussed, debated, and defined. And that is what makes this document a living document. And I don't think that this may be an idea for academics to discuss about new constitution because the demographics have changed, so we should begin to, but what is behind that is again, same thing that this is 2017. Somewhere we forget that the world has become a little more integrated. We cannot build walls and then call it a progress of a group of people. It doesn't mean we should have totally unsecure borders, not at all. We should have immigration policy. We have immigration laws, but we do not have immigration policy. Look to North, Canada has immigration policy and there is no turmoil. Therefore, there are solutions to what is causing this disturbance, making us think that, oh, we should have a constitutional convention to fix it so that it will meet our needs. Not at all. Our leaders in Congress, our rule of law institutions have plenty of ability and room to continue this blessed journey and this experience that had lasted 230 years. It will last centuries more.
So I should say that it is inspirational to hear all of your perspectives about the faith that you have in the existing system, because I think that's at the heart of some of the fear of change, is that, you know, the systems that we know and love and in some way are part of our DNA might have a different expectation for them. So that's wonderful to hear you articulate that. What I'd love to do is have the audience also articulate what questions that you may have. We have microphones on each side of the McGowan Theater, and we would be happy to entertain intelligent, good questions, preferably a single question rather than multiple dialogues. Yes, sir.
Hi,
Tell us who you are, and let's have a question.
Yes, Carl Golovin, domain reference anidealivеson.net. And I actually have to try to squeeze in a 3-point question, not a sermon, though.
It always happens. It's okay.
The Constitution doesn't have the words protest, demonstrate, or march within it. It says peaceably assemble and petition for redress of grievances. And it's profoundly un-American to let ourselves be race-baited and fear-mongered into conflict. We're supposed to peaceably assemble. It's reminiscent of the documentary American Coup, what, through Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA did in Iran in 1953 by hiring both sides of the groups that rioted in order to overthrow Mossadegh in Iran. But you mentioned 9/11. I have to say, I'm a retired special agent U.S. Customs. I helped go through the rubble of World Trade Center 7. The official story of the collapse of the three towers is not true. The Bobby McIlvaine World Trade Center Investigation Act should be supported by all Americans through AE911truth.org. But the main thing, we have lost sight that when chattel slavery was ended, we have all become slaves to the debt of an expanding, irredeemable system of credit. Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts.
Any questions in there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shall we reform the constitutional monetary system so that we can have an honest unit of account in a civil society?
Yeah. Should we reform the monetary system? That was the question?
In accordance with the U.S. Constitution.
Okay.
Is there an individual right to a constitutional unit of account that isn't being depreciated and inflated as our current system of credit.
Okay, so anybody want to take up monetary policy?
I would love to have Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
Great, next question. I have to say, we were really hoping for Dolly Madison on something, and it just isn't happening. So.
Good evening. My name's David Wasserstein, and I'm a law student here, actually, in D.C. My question is, do you think there's a risk, with no offense to Mr. Madison, of course, do you think there's a risk in deifying the founders, in sort of mythologizing to an extent that's almost biblical? Our reverence for those months in July is almost, it's pretty staggering, and it sort of papers over the very fractious differences that our country had and has. Do you think there is a better way of sort of teaching what's fundamental about this country and the way it was created?
All right, so I think the question is, do we have an ancestor worship problem?
Hamilton? That's all I have to say about that.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to the idea that there is a kind of, maybe a kind of sentimental reverence for them that can be overdone. When people propose constitutional amendments, for example, there's this reflex to say, well, we've got this majestic document, let's not mess with it. Well, we've got extremely strong structural protections against ill-considered constitutional amendments. Do we really need to additionally have this kind of cultural hostility to them? No, I mean, we've got the amendment process in the Constitution for a reason, because they knew it wasn't going to be a perfect document.
Yeah, just changed 27 times, 10 of those the Bill of Rights, as you indicated. 2 are the mulligan around prohibition.
Yeah, I wouldn't vouch for each of those amendments.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Elliot Bell-Krasner. I'm with the American Council of Young Political Leaders. First of all, I think you all did a really fantastic job tonight, so thank you so much for this. My question is specifically for Mr. Ponnuru. Shortly before the Iowa caucuses, your publication released a series of editorials very critical of then-candidate Trump, and I think one last attempt to impede his candidacy before he eventually won the Republican nomination and then the presidency. And then since he has become president, many of those same authors who were very critical of him have all of a sudden been heaping praise on him. And he has been critical of any press or any journalist who has not agreed with him unequivocally. So my question for you and the other panelists, of course, is what do you see the role of the press, given the importance of the First Amendment and our free press? What do you see the role of journalists such as yourself, who were very critical of President Obama, but may not be so critical of President Trump for doing many of the same things that they attacked President Obama for? What do you see your role as being?
Yes, National Review did do an against Trump issue. We had 13 or 14 people in a symposium on that. And it is true, I would say about 1 or 2 of those people have changed their minds due to circumstances. I think the rest of them will, when he does something that they, have records of already standing for, they'll say, yeah, okay, we'll give him credit for that. But most of them are also pretty critical of him a lot of the time. You guys have heard me tonight, I don't think I've pulled any punches about President Trump and what I see as his many deficiencies. On the general question of what the role of the press should be, I think it's got to be to hold power to account, to uncover the truth, and that means reporting things good and bad, and letting the chips fall where they may. I do think it is all the more important at a time when you've got an administration that is seeking to delegitimize the press, not just to fight back against that, but also to understand that one of the ways you fight back against that is to be as sure as you can that you're getting the story right.
Maria, do you have anything as
I know we're in very hallowed ground, but I'm going to make a little joke here. Doug is like, what?
Yeah, yeah. These never work out.
No, it's okay. I mean, the truth is that like looking at the Constitution and understanding how we change vis-a-vis or how the Constitution changes vis-a-vis us, you know, as a journalist, this is a very particular dynamic that we're experiencing with this particular administration. I mean, there's always, you know, I didn't get the interview with any of the past presidents, by the way. Actually, the last one who gave me an interview was Bill Clinton. But beyond that, haven't been able to get an interview with any sitting president. So it's neither party likes me. But with this particular administration, I like to joke that I am 5 things that this president has actually said he doesn't like. So I'm Mexican, I'm an immigrant, I'm a journalist, I'm a woman, and I'm flat-chested. Yeah, my people. So I joke about it, but truthfully, the thing is that it's like it is for us as journalists. It is a very different head. It is a constant kind of challenge that we are living and breathing because things are changing. You know, when you have a president who is clearly showing sympathy for white nationalists, white supremacists, et cetera, and we are journalists of color, how does that impact the work that we do? It's a question that we don't have an answer for necessarily, but it is a question that we are being posed right now. And I just want to say that what we're doing is we're doing the best work that we can, as factual as we can. We haven't stopped doing what we're doing. We're doing more of it and trying to do more better work, if you will, deeper investigations, holding more accountable. That's what we can do, but we are also having these kinds of conversations that are difficult and challenging about how do we change and what is our role and how do we stay on top of that.
I want to add one thing that I forgot to mention. It's also, I think, really important that we keep track of what's important, and what's important is not what shoes Melania Trump is wearing, right? I mean, I think there is way too much of that coverage that, and it's just all becomes noise.
I have to say, I felt I wonder what your thoughts are on this. So there was a Time magazine tweet. I don't know, I woke up one morning last week, didn't wake up in such a good mood because of things that are happening. The first tweet that I saw was Time magazine. See the transformation of Melania from model to first lady. I probably should have taken a breath because all I did was I tweeted back, I don't care, period. Because I don't care. And that's not the kind of journalism that we need right now. So, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should have not done that, but I did.
If it makes you feel any better, I saw that one.
And you didn't write to me and say, take it down.
You're stalking us on Twitter, that's why.
Let's take one last question.
Hello, my name is David Hansen, and I am from Fairfax County. I want to thank all the panelists, and you each said something that really struck with me. So first, Mr. Khan, you described very articulately behaviors that you described with the word un-American. And then, Ms. Hinojosa, you described some of those same behaviors and some of the history that, in fact, that they were very, very American. I took that to mean the Constitution in its aspirations and our country in its imperfect expressions. And then, Mr. Ponnuru, you perhaps had some of the most insightful comments relating to what actually underlies the Constitution. And in order for it to work in the future, certain things have to be taken for granted. We've talked about ethnicity tonight. We've talked about immigration tonight. We haven't talked about the degradation of many of the foundational ideas that people are holding today, the belief in science, the belief in truth, the profound distrust in journalism. Will that cause an undermining of our Constitution as we move forward when some of these foundational ideas that are not even articulated in the Constitution are being called into question and are not universally observed?
Well, I agree with all the praise.
He was the most insightful. He's from Kansas. What do you expect?
That's it. It's the Kansas.
It's the Kansas thing.
route. Look, I think I think that we've got. I think you're touching on a problem that we've all touched on in various ways here. I would just say on the question of sort of whether we're going to have recover a sense that there is a truth in common, that is ascertainable. We have to, and I get back to this point about the media. We talk about people delegitimizing it, but the media has been complicit in its own delegitimization through a lack of responsiveness, through an insularity, and through sometimes wanting to get the story first. A lot of times, more and more, actually, get the story first rather than get the story right.
Yeah, I think your question is a great one because it does speak to those foundations, I think was your word, the foundations that underpin so much of what we expect for our Constitution, and how, as those wither, it does feel as though there's not as much stability. But then, as you said earlier, maybe we've had a 230-year experience of instability growing into this as a constitutional people. I still don't think I've gotten out of you whether it's going to change or not in the next 20 years, but we know that I would love to have you back for the 250th anniversary in 2037. Let's do a lightning round, 15 seconds. What gives you hope between now and the 250th anniversary of the Constitution? What gives you constitutional hope? Maria.
The fact that one of the core beliefs in our country is that that we have freedom of expression, and that therefore, and there is a sense of, we understand the importance of our First Amendment, not just out there in the world, but as people. And like Mr. Khan, I travel the country. I've been to all 50 states multiple times, and 2 territories, Puerto Rico and Guam, yay Guam. And when I travel, this is what I see. And by the way, I'm talking with people when I'm out in the world who may think very differently with me. So that's my job as a journalist. I'm talking with everyone. That's what gives me hope. The fact that when I think of, Representative Steve King in Iowa, his district is 40% Latino, right? And so in that district, they're having these conversations, and there's demographic change. And that out there in Minnesota, in the middle of nowhere, you have a community of Somali refugees who are American citizens, Mexican immigrants, and white folks, and they're all figuring it out. And they're having political conversations, and they're doing it. And they may not have their copy of the Constitution, but they understand that that's kind of what our country looks like when you're talking about democracy with a small d. So that gives me, it's the people. It's the people, and even the people who are, because I like to hang out with white supremacists. So if you have any friends, let me know, because I'd like to speak with them. I'm being serious. It's like even when I've spoken with them and interviewed them, and I've asked them, okay, so now that we're friends and we know each other, and they're very, Terry, my white supremacist friend who had this was not 15 seconds, sorry,
not at all.
Who had Adolf Hitler tattooed here. And I said, Terry, we've just spent all these time together. I really like you. You really like me. Like, we're cool, even though we're, I said, so what would you tell me as a friend, as an American? He said, you should leave the country. Because I like you. You should leave. So dialogue. And that is why I'm hopeful, because I do believe that we're not all out there with the torches and the guns. We're actually, if everybody can get out of their comfort zone, we actually can believe in that dialogue. So,
Mr. Khan, give us your best 15 seconds. Now, I'd love it for it to be your 15 seconds, not Maria's 15 seconds.
Well, look, this is my hope. By our values, we are self-governing people. We have governed ourselves for centuries. We will continue to govern ourselves. And we know when we see an authoritarian tendency among our elected officials. And there are signs that are so visible to this nation. That is, they will malign the media because media tells the truth. It informs the public. They do not like rule of law because that overrules their whims and wishes. That is ingrained in this, that is woven in the fabric of American nation. as long as that remains, we have hope we will continue to move forward through this dark period to a better future.
15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Two things give me hope. The first is that I always remember that the loudest voices are not necessarily the most representative. And the second is that this remains a great country with vast reserves of decency and good sense, even if those reserves sometimes seem like they're not being tapped.
Well, I have to tell you, what gives me hope is that you've joined us, and we've had people all over the United States joining us through our live stream. And I hope that this has really prompted you to... Oh, we have another question here. Uh-oh. He's hope. No pressure.
If your name is actually Hope, that'll be even better.
We didn't say it, but the State of the Constitution every year has become more and more democratic, and you have been voted as the last voice. We hope it's great.
I'm Jackson DuPont, and I'm from T.C. Williams High School, just in Alexandria. Yep. And my question was, in the 230 years that our Constitution has been alive, it has never lived in a more connected era. And how will the Constitution and our government weather social media and the constancy of information, especially in this era of disinformation? And will it strengthen our government, or will it further undermine it?
Well, that's up to you.
Yeah, we should be asking you the question, actually. Can you tell us what the future looks like?
I would say...
That's a hard question.
Okay.
Yeah, you've been voted as the last word here. Are we going to survive you?
Yeah, are you hopeful?
I love this country, and I think that, well, one, all our ideas are equally represented in our government, but I do have to say that the trends that we are seeing today, not just in the United States, but all across the world with Brexit and this failure of the European Union, is that we as citizens have to spend more time and effort to combat these ideals and thoughts that are corrupting our consciousness of freedom. So that's what I think.
There you go. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for the 11th Annual State of the Constitution. Thank you to the National Archives and the Archives Foundation and the Claude Moore Charitable Trust. Have a great night.